Skirmishers are light infantry or cavalry soldiers stationed to act as a vanguard, flank guard, or rearguard, screening a tactical position or a larger body of friendly troops from enemy attacks. They are usually deployed in a skirmish line, an irregular open formation much more spread out in depth and breadth than a traditional line formation. The purpose is to harass the enemy, engaging them in only light or sporadic combat in order to delay the movement, disrupt their attack, or weaken the morale. Skirmishes, open formations and smaller numbers can give them superior mobility over the regular forces, allowing them to fight on more favorable terms, taking advantage of better position or terrain and quickly withdrawing from any threat of superior enemy forces. Skirmishes can be either regular army units temporarily detached to perform skirmishing, or specialty units specifically armed and trained for such low-level irregular warfare tactics. Light infantry, light cavalry, and irregular units often specialize in skirmishing, though often critical in screening the main army from sudden enemy attacks. Skirmishes are poor at taking and defending ground from heavy infantry or heavy cavalry. In modern times, following the obsolescence of such heavy troops, all infantry has become indistinguishable from skirmishers, and the term has lost military meaning. A battle with only light, indecisive combat is often called a skirmish. History. Pre-modern. In ancient and medieval warfare, skirmishes typically carried bows, javelins, slings, and sometimes light shields. Acting as light infantry with the light arms and minimal armor, they could run ahead of the main battle line, release a volley of arrows, sling shots of javelins, and retreat behind the main battle line before the clash of the opposing main forces. The aims of skirmishing were to disrupt enemy formations by causing casualties before the main battle, and to tempt the opposing infantry into attacking prematurely, throwing their organization into disarray. Skirmishes could also be effectively used to surround opposing soldiers in the absence of friendly cavalry. Once preliminary skirmishing was over, skirmishers participated in the main battle by shooting into the enemy formation, or joined in melee combat with daggers or short swords. Due to the mobility, skirmishes were also valuable for reconnaissance, especially in wooded or urban areas. In classical Greece, skirmishes originally had low status. For example, Herodotus, in his account of the Battle of Plataea of 479 BC, mentions that the Spartans fielded 35,000 lightly armed helots to 5,000 hoplites, yet there is no mention of them in his account of the fighting. Often Greek historians ignored them altogether, though Xenophon distinguished them explicitly from the stately troops. It was far cheaper to equip oneself as lightly armed as opposed to a fully armed hoplite. Indeed, it was not uncommon for the lightly armed to go into battle equipped with stones. Hence the low status of skirmishers reflected the low status of the poorer sections of society who made up skirmishers. Additionally, hit-and-run tactics contradicted the Greek ideal of heroism. Plato gives the skirmisher a voice to advocate flight without shame, but only to denounce it as an inversion of decent values. Nevertheless, skirmishers chalked up significant victories in this period, such as the Athenian defeat at the hands of the Aetolian javelin men in 426 BC and, in the same war, the Athenian victory of Sphacteria. Skirmisher infantry would gain more respect in the subsequent years as the usefulness was more widely recognized and as the ancient bias against them waned. Peltasts, light javelin infantry, played a vital role in the Peloponnesian War, and well-equipped skirmisher troops such as Thureophoroi and Thoracites would be developed to provide a strong mobile force for the Greek and Macedonian armies. Celts did not, in general, favor ranged weapons. The exceptions tended not to include the use of skirmishers. The Britons used the sling and javelin extensively, but for siege warfare, not skirmishing. Among the Gauls likewise, the bow was employed when defending a fixed position. The Celtic lack of skirmishes cost them dearly during the Gallic invasion of Greece of 279 BC, where they found themselves helpless in the face of Aetolian skirmishing tactics. In the Punic Wars, despite the Roman and Carthaginian armies' different organizations, skirmishes had the same role in both. To screen the main armies, the Roman legions of this period had a specialized infantry class called velites that acted as skirmish troops, engaging the enemy before the Roman heavy infantry made contact, while the Carthaginians recruited the skirmishers from native peoples across the Carthaginian Empire. The Roman army of the late Republican and early imperial periods frequently recruited foreign auxiliary troops to act as skirmishers to supplement the citizen legions. The medieval skirmishers were generally armed with crossbows or longbows wielded largely by commoners. In the 14th century, although long held in disdain by Castilian heavy cavalry manned by the aristocracy, the crossbowmen contributed greatly to the Portuguese victory at the Battle of Aljubarrota. Similarly, English archers played a key role in the English victory over French heavy cavalry at Crecy. In the next century they largely repeated the feat at the Battle of Agincourt. Such disasters have been seen as marking the beginning of the end of the dominance of the medieval cavalry in particular and heavy cavalry in general. The Americas. The 7 Years' War and American Revolutionary War were two early conflicts in which the modern rifle began to make a significant contribution to warfare. Despite its lower rate of fire, its accuracy at long range offered advantages over the smoothbore musket in common use among regular armies of the time. In both those wars many American frontiersmen served in the militia. The Continental Army during the American Revolutionary War was assisted by such irregular troops, such as the Minutemen. They engaged in skirmishing tactics, firing from cover rather than in the open field engagements customary at the time. Their tactics were influenced by experiences fighting Native Americans. Militia in a skirmish role was particularly effective in the Battle of Cowpens. The character of Natty Bumppo in James Fenimore Cooper's novel The Last of the Mohicans was notably called La Longue Carabine by the French due to his skill with the long rifle common among the colonials. Napoleonic Wars. During the Napoleonic Wars, skirmishes played a key role in battles, attempting to disrupt the main enemy force by firing into the close-packed ranks and by preventing enemy skirmishers from doing the same to friendly troops. Because skirmishers generally fought in open order, they could take cover behind trees, houses, towers and similar items, thereby presenting unrewarding targets for small arms and artillery fire. Such tactics often made them vulnerable to cavalry. However, a skirmish force screening the main body of infantry became so important to any army in the field that eventually all the major European powers developed specialized skirmishing infantry. Examples included the German Jaeger, French voltigeurs and British riflemen. While muskets were the predominant infantry weapon of the late 18th century, the British Army learned first-hand of the importance of rifles in the American Revolutionary War and began experimenting with them shortly thereafter, resulting in the Baker rifle. Although slower to reload and more costly to produce than a musket, they were much more accurate target and proved their worth in the Peninsular War. Throughout the conflict, British riflemen were able to selectively target and eliminate the officers and NCOs of French forces from outside of musket range. In the American theater, American riflemen again contributed to British casualties but now had to contend with revised British light infantry tactics. A consequence of experiences during these wars was a trend to training line troops to adopt tactics that until then had been used only by skirmishers. American Civil War. The treatise New American Tactics by General John Watts de Peyster advocated making the skirmish line the new line of battle, a revolutionary idea at the time. During the American Civil War, it was common for cavalrymen to dismount and form a skirmish line to delay enemy troops advancing towards an objective. Modern by the late 19th century, the concept of fighting information was on the wane. Heavy infantry had disappeared, and all infantry effectively became skirmishers. The term has become largely obsolete in a military sense. However, some modern military units still have a higher emphasis on mobility. The former Soviet Army had lighter-wheeled BTR-equipped motorized rifle regiments fighting on the flanks or secondary sectors of a motorized rifle division on the offensive, while heavy-attract BMP-equipped motorized rifle regiments would fight in the division's sector of main effort. In the early 21st century, the U.S. Army has also adopted a doctrine of having light rapid deployment striker brigades on wheels and heavier mechanized and armored units with tracked Bradleys and Abrams as main combat forces.